afternoon. Welcome back to Science Sundays. So I'm John Beacom. I'm the chair of the Science Sundays Committee, and I'm a member of the Department of Physics and the Department of Astronomy. And I'm privileged to help run this committee with a group of great people from across the arts and sciences. And one of the things that's really fun about being in that college is, well, we're covering the arts and sciences. So technically that covers natural and mathematical sciences, social and behavioral sciences, and arts and humanities. And there's a reason those things are together, and the reason is they're connected. And we define the scope of the science that we cover here very broadly. And so today's speaker is from the arts and humanities. Today's speaker is Professor Chris Coleman. He's the director of ACCAD, which is known as the Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design. And it's a long-standing and unique part of Ohio State that we have something like this that helps connect technical scientific aspects with artistic aspects. Now, Chris actually began his career in, I believe, mechanical engineering, and then at the last minute decided he wanted to be an artist and switched. And I think that's a really great thing. He's now in the Department of Art. He's the first director in the Department of, ACCAD director in the Department of Art in some years, and so it brings a new and different perspective. He's been there for about a year and a half, and he's been a participant in these Science Sundays talks as sitting in the audience, but now we're going to have a chance to bring him up himself. 2 quick notes before I forget. 3. The reception today is upstairs. Sometimes it's in a secret location. It's in the usual location today. We have a bunch of Arts and Science Sundays flyers available outside. Take as many as you want because we're running them out. And the last thing is, many of you might be interested in another event that's coming up next weekend, and that is TEDx Ohio State. So TED, TEDx, and then just Google TEDx Ohio State University. Next week, it's a bunch of public lecture type talks covering a wide range of topics. I've been to this before. Those are a lot of fun. So many of you might be interested too. But without further ado, let's welcome Professor Chris Coleman.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to John and the Science Sundays group. Thank you to all of you for being here on a lovely Sunday. A bit chilly, but regardless, there's nice to see the sun. I will only keep you out of the sun for an hour or so. Today we're going to talk about centering humans at the interaction of art, design, and technology. There's a little bit of an inside joke here for the art and technology people. To the rest of you, this seems just a slightly awkward wording. But we'll move on from there because I am going to really focus on interaction itself, not just an intersection. And thinking deeply about what it means to put humans first and humanity first as we engage with this technological change. I'm going to start with a couple of artworks that I've been a part of. The first 2 are also actually collaborations with my partner, Professor Lale Mehran, who is also in the art department. We have been working together and trying to deeply think about what it means to have art that doesn't just point out problems in the world, but actually suggests how we might move forward. And we did this with this project called Wi-Fi. So the W3FI is what's known as Leet Speak. It's where the kids substitute numbers for letters, so it's like a backwards E, just to fill in the hole there. So using a little bit of Leet Speak to reframe the words the self, the we, and then the Wi-Fi, with the idea being that S3LF is the digital self that all of us have. And that digital self is made up of things like your medical records, your social media history, everything else that has been digitized and put online, all of your credit card records, right? This all becomes a digital self. And, companies are using our digital selves to sell things to us and make giant evaluations of who we are and what we might want. But I also, as Lolly and I were thinking about this work, we were thinking a lot about the digital self as actually becoming important to us, not just as a commodity. And it was an interesting question to say, if somebody asked you, would you rather have somebody hurt your credit score or hit you in the face? Which one would you choose? Right? And so, like, there's this central proposition there that actually we're starting to value our digital presence more than our physical presence in some ways. Not in every case. But it was this big question. And so if we are starting to really value our digital self, then we have to be really aware of what it means to sort of interact with other digital selves in the world. Because we can actually hurt each other's digital selves much easier than we can hurt each other's physical selves. So it makes it twice as impactful that we show care and respect for each other in the digital world. Again, this is a proposition in 2011. Whether or not that has moved forward in a healthy way is a different discussion. But what we were looking at was modeled on the Buddhist path to enlightenment, was the idea of accepting that we all have digital selves, that I have one and you have one, and that together we have digital collectives, the digital we. And what we want to transcend to, what we want to build up towards, is a space where we're all supporting each other in the digital world, maybe in ways that we're not currently accomplishing in the physical world. So we proposed rewiring the Wi-Fi into we-fi. Instead of the I, the singular, how we address our connection to each other, maybe we all need to really think of our networked connections as a place of coming together. And that really comes out as an installation or an experience that we created and in a sort of pretty broad and vast collaboration. We worked with graphic designers, we worked with motion designers, we worked with digital fabricators, we worked with many students who helped us do all of this labor. The installation, the first version that we did, actually took us about 230 hours to install, involving 6 projectors, some of them showing data visualizations, some of them showing live incoming information, data analysis, as well as telling a kind of story or creating an educational space. And so we were really interested in what it meant to make a space that was simultaneously both digital and physical. And when we thought about that, it meant that we had to combine projection with carefully mapped vinyl on the wall. And the result looks something like this. This show started in Boulder, Colorado. We actually went on to show this work all over the world, Dubai, Taiwan, Argentina, and several places here in the US. Every time we show it, it's actually pretty dramatically different. We want to take on the culture and the values of each of those locations and really interrogate how that group of people are thinking about the internet. And I think what we saw were lots of different people reckoning with the onslaught of social media at the time in very different ways. Whereas in the US, it really felt like we had already accepted what social media was doing, although I don't think we completely understood even at that time just how intent it would be on trying to get us all to disagree with each other. But other cultures were actually really seeing the sort of bad potential of this and really asking questions of whether or not they even wanted to join the social media networks. And so that was a sort of important part of the process. So as I said, the work includes things like a heat map of how people are using cellular data in the city in an average week, We had locations of all the Wi-Fi stations across the city. We have all the cell phone towers across the city. We're telling different stories. We have real-time Twitter feeds at the time that were coming in that were relaying how people were thinking about themselves and each other. And finally, as part of an interactive component to the work, it actually invites you to step up and add your face to a new network, the Wi-Fi network. Here you're seeing a configuration of this from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm going to kick through this just a little bit. Oh, maybe I won't. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Sorry, I'm trying to get the movie controller. There we go. And now, all right. You saw it in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was very different when we had it in Dubai. We have a lot of the landscape from each location. And it was, again, this sort of like ongoing exploration, but also conversation that we had with each location. I think from that work, again, work that Lale and I did together, is this work called Unclaimed. It was actually initiated as part of a project called the Biennial of the Americas, which is an effort in Denver, Colorado to try and gather the artwork of the entire set of Americas, from the far north to the far south. A really interesting effort, especially in light of current objectives, I suppose. But Unclaimed itself, the name Unclaimed, was really about this idea of the shared commons. And at the time, and I don't know how much this still lasts, but we were thinking a lot about the airspace that is above your house, but below what the FCC controls. And this is a really beautiful airspace. It's places where birds fly, drones fly, kites fly. And it felt like there was a little bit of freedom left in terms of who was controlling what. And for us, the real question was like, what are the other sort of like qualities of this particular unclaimed bit of airspace? And we were thinking of it as a commons, a notion that, emerges from a sort of English discussion of a shared bit of land where everybody could let their sheep roam, and nobody really needed to own the land. Everybody could sort of share it together and take care of it together. And we really liked this idea of the commons, and how could we sort of bring that back to the surface in terms of making shared space with each other. And I think this is especially important because this layer of unclaimed air is not just here. The air that flows through our unclaimed space is actually exchanged around the entire world. This is a global effort, a global conversation about the air that we breathe every day, and that we have our cars emit into and our factories emit into. It's not just our breath, of course. So we proposed a project. I'm sorry, are we able to pull down just this light, possibly? If not, it's fine. Oh yeah, great, awesome, thank you. So we proposed a project for a particular room in a museum, and we started taking on the mechanical engineering challenge of this piece and some electrical engineering challenge. This is a demonstration of these relay sets that we wanted to use to control hundreds of fans with. This is what it looks like when you're testing what brand of computer case fan you actually want to use for a project. This is when you've decided and you order hundreds of these from China. And then having to wire them all up into harnesses and get them under control. We also created a city, and the city was made up of hundreds of houses, and different buildings, all modeled on the city of Denver and their sort of classical architecture. All of the buildings that we created were actually uploaded into a shared repository online. We'll come back to this, but we're very interested in how the things we make can also be used by others. All of the buildings were printed out of PLA, which means that they're biodegradable to a certain extent. That's a longer conversation too. And then finally, to light the city, we set up this LED table that would sort of exist underneath the city itself. And we were trying to figure out what it would look like to imagine people's breaths. And these are just some more install pics of us putting this together. And the result was this exhibition. It ran for several months at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver in 2015. This is a lot pre-COVID. It's an interesting discussion. But at the time, people could stand around this table and they could blow across the city. And the city would actually pick up your breath and light up the city with the sort of effect of your breath. So making you very present. And those breaths from around the table would actually mix and complement each other. We no longer get down and blow across the table into each other's faces. It's a habit that is not very common these days. But here you can see an overhead view of what that looks like as people are blowing into the city. And, that's beautiful, and it's a way of thinking about our presence in the city and how wind blows through a city, how our breath exists, both intake and outtake in the city itself. But we wanted to expand on that. We wanted people to think about that more than just a series of pretty lights, but how to actually imagine that as a powerful force that exists above all of us. It's going to be a little bit dark to see in here, but this is actually panning up to the ceiling because we replaced the entire ceiling with hundreds of these computer fans underneath a giant sheet of plastic, and the fans actually reproduce your breath underneath the plastic. And so what you see as light on the table actually becomes forms, giant humps underneath the plastic. As the entire top of the room moves and breathes, like in sort of a multiplicative way, you see your breath and the breath of others multiplied and shift and flow across the entire ceiling. So there becomes this entire secondary layer. Because we wanted to sort of reinforce how responsible we all are for this airspace and what it is that we're actually sharing. I think it was really quite interesting in thinking about the work itself. We actually had an exchange between the top of the room and the bottom of the room. By putting in the work, we actually sort of made a secondary space, a secondary volume of air above the plastic. And so there was actually a sort of positive and negative effect. If somebody blew over here, it would actually slam the plastic in another area, as it had to reach a sort of strange medium. It was also really beautiful. You can't hear it here, but the piece actually sounds like ocean waves. So when you have that much really thin plastic, it actually has a gorgeous white noise as it flows back and forth across the room. And finally, there were two displays at each end of the room that had a live camera view above the plastic, giving you a second view of a kind of landscape that was being created from your breath. There you saw some of the plastic sucked down as this other form was being made across the room. So we really enjoyed that there was this sort of like nonstop conversation about your presence and your breath and the interaction of multiple breaths in the space. The space was also lit by an evolving set of lights according to the sort of light cycle, the day and night cycle of Denver itself. So the sky was lit like the sky in Denver. I think as I've moved on in my career, I've also been thinking about my research in other ways, because making artwork is really powerful and it's a really amazing opportunity. But teaching at a university is a huge privilege. It's an opportunity to really think deeply about how we're engaged with the public, what it is we're doing to support the work that we believe in. And that led me to actually developing some open source software as a professor. For those of you who don't know, open source software means software where you put all the code up online in such a way that other people can actually download and or contribute to the code. And so it can become a sort of community engaged engine. Other people can download it, just download it and use it, but people might actually make suggestions or even improvements to your code as well. And I became really interested in this culture around these open source tools, and I realized that as a member of a university, I actually had a lot of resources that I could put towards supporting these communities around these tools for artists. Because, let's be clear, artists don't get a lot of money for things. and while it's easy to convince a company to give you money to make software that supports, I don't know, a browser engine or an underlying tool for a database system, it's much harder to get donations to sort of support a tool that is used by maybe 1,000 artists around the world. But to those 1,000 artists, it's their everything. It's their method of expression. And so we need to figure out how to do that work. I decided to do that work through COSA, again, the Clinic for Open Source Arts, thinking about this not as a center, because a center implies that we are the center of knowledge, which is exciting. At ACCAD, we are actually a center of knowledge. But the Clinic for Open Source Arts, I wanted to be more about a collective effort. So I was thinking about it as a clinic, as both a space for healing and for conversation. I was also thinking about just that a lot of these open source tools for artists are both really essential, but oftentimes it's just one or a very few number of people supporting them. And you can imagine that a tool like that, a tool that's just made by one person and used by just 1,000 people, actually has a significant difficulty raising money, especially because people who use free and open source tools a lot of times don't have the means to sort of give back to the tool. And so how do we support those people? Because they're making these things out of love. They're not making this to make a living. They're making this out of spare time and love. So long-term care for these kinds of tools requires more than one person to be engaged. And so the work of COSA is really to start to build communities around different artist tools, to really help them understand how they can move forward and be sustainable, and even write grants and funnel money into these tools and their opportunities. So we bring together contributors with a lot of different experience levels. They include, and in our definition, a contributor to a open source tool doesn't just mean the people who write the code. That's actually the common definition of an open source project, is like, that's who matters. However, we use a different definition actually pioneered by Lauren Lee McCarthy, who does this open source tool called P5JS. Side note, she will be here in about a month here at the university, so you should catch that talk as well. But Lauren posited that the contributors go beyond the coders. They actually include the organizers, the people who teach with that tool or teach about that tool, the people who make YouTube tutorials, or even just people who like take a cool video of a thing they made with that tool and put it online, because they're getting attention to the tool itself. They're building a community. So all those people are contributors. And once you sort of understand that sort of broad definition of contributors, then you're working with a very different group of people. You're not just inviting a whole bunch of coders to the event. You're inviting people to work together who come from many, many different situations. What we really like is we actually put together these conferences. It's called the Open Source Arts Contributors Conference. We're actually doing one here at OSU this fall. It'll be the inaugural edition. Very excited to do that. But we bring together people who work on different tools and put them in the same room together. And again, this is kind of revolutionary, because too often the people who make one tool, they get together and maybe they'll have a little bit of a party and they'll work together, or maybe they just know each other online. But bringing all of these tools and putting them in the same room actually opened up an entire sort of universe of connection, of networking, of co-building. And we were quite excited to watch how, like, for instance, in this case, there's someone here who works on a real-time live coding software, which is where people actually create visuals for a music concert, and you can actually see their code, and they're typing it in real time. It's a really crazy experience. They're not, other people use software, and it's like cool, but these people are just like typing in lines of code right in front of you. So Olivia Jack is talking with her online, like web-based live coding tool with the gentleman who actually invented something called 3JS, which is an online web tool used by like NASA to do their 3D simulations online. It's a really crazy array of people, like super punk rock meets, mainstream web foundational technology. And they're working together to solve problems that they're both having at different scales. And so not only are they solving technical problems, but they're talking about community problems, and they're talking about community solutions. They're talking about funding solutions. They're talking about much more existential conversations. And at the end of the day, they know each other. And so now they have finally met in such a way that they have a network they can now rely on. They're no longer the single person working on evenings to make this tool that they know, like, there's 1,000 people that just really love it. They finally have somebody they can talk to. And so that's really the power of the work that we do at OSAC. And it's worth saying that, building and sustaining all of these artist tools takes a lot of people, who are working in their free time. And we really need to steward these tools through their change and their growth, so that the communities that rely on them are really supported. And it really is my intense belief that institutions like universities can do so much more to support the tools that their young artists are using both in the classroom, but also that they're going to walk out into the world and need to use later. Because let's face the fact, not all the students we're training are going to afford Adobe Creative Cloud after they're done here. They're getting a great deal during the student pricing, but the next steps of their career might not involve working for a big company that is paying that price for them, and so they might not be able to afford $120, $160 a month to support just the essential tools that they need to make their artwork. So we need alternatives, and we need to support that work as an institution. So all of this has led me to working at ACCAD. I think my interest in thinking deeply about how people work together to make better things happen as a collective really connected with ACCAD as they were searching for their next leader. I was also really intrigued at this job. I already had a tenured full professor gig somewhere else. I didn't need to come take a crazy job in Ohio. But I was really excited because ACCAD was already showcasing and thinking about how people from not just across the arts, not just across the art department, and not just from across the arts, but across the entire university could actually collaborate in creating creative experiences and ways of learning and ways of knowing. And so it's been a real treat to join this crew. You know, they're a long-standing research center. I'm going to show you some of the work. I'm not responsible for any of it. Let's just be clear. They are awesome people, actually a number of them who are present here today, who actually have been doing this work for years, really pioneering what it looks like to combine all of these ways of knowing and knowledge through channeling that through technological tools. But it's been here at OSU for quite a long time. I actually knew about it when I was a young student in West Virginia and thinking about art and technology. I had heard about this crazy place up in Ohio that I had to check out. But what I really like is that they've done a lot of early work establishing how artists and computers interact. And it's a really important hub here at the university that connects the visual art to the music, to the dance, to the theater, to film, to design, and really centers them around, again, this interaction and centering, thinking about the human center of that, where technology meets, where all of these places meet and can be maybe emboldened by technology or empowered by technology, or maybe they avoid technology. So there are also possibilities in that. But technology being a sort of center conversation for all of them. And so what does that actually look like? It looks like various residencies that we've done with artists, such as Ati. Here we have an artist who is a musician and wanted to imagine something much bigger for what his performances could be and what they would look like. And so this started with instrumentation. It emerges into immersive sound. It extends into projection mapping and motion capture for creating characters that embody some of his ideas and culture. But I think, you know, it's a really great example of what it looks like when you bring all of these different people together. I'm sorry it's a little bit dark, but you know, dark spaces provide really beautiful, subtle experiences. You have to be there, I suppose. But a lot of this emerges from a residency series called Livable Futures, which is led by Nora Zuniga-Shaw, who has been at the center for quite a long time. But it involves and engages the research staff at ACCAD, as well as the other faculty and even the graduate students and sometimes undergraduate students. So everybody's learning during this process. Another group of people working in dance who also were able to expand their practice to become very immersive in their work. We have this really amazing space called the Motion Lab over in ACCAD, where we can really try out and prototype lots of different kinds of experiences. It's not meant as a primary performance space, but it's a way where artists can come and we can work with them to develop really complex experiences and ways that their work can actually expand through technology. And so it's really exciting to be a part of this group of people who have so many skills, are engaging so many different technologies, and really the imagination, the collective imagination, allows us to do something much bigger when we work together at ACCAD. And that extends beyond the arts as well. For instance, this is a shot of somebody in VR, virtual reality, and they're actually in a kitchen, a digital kitchen, and they're learning how to cook. but they're learning how to cook from somebody who's speaking to them in Chinese. And the question of this project, so again, these are prototypes. The question of this project is, can we actually learn better when we're really immersed in a world? And maybe we can create a simulation of a world. Maybe I can't actually go to China and learn to cook in China in an immersive situation, but maybe I can put on VR and get a little bit closer. And once again, this involves so many people. It involves 3D modelers. It involves coders who are thinking about interaction. It involves people who really know the language and are thinking about the interactive interface itself. So it's really great to see how all of these pieces come together. I think, again, this also is connected to actually a series of grants that are about language itself. And the meta question was, if you can learn vocabulary and learn how to follow instructions because you're in a deeply contextualized space, but not just because you're in that space, but you're actually engaging your body in the motions. So learning to cook, you don't just learn about like chopping something with a knife, but you're actually like virtually cutting something with a knife. And maybe that helps you learn just a little bit better. Of course, this can extend to other spaces as well. We're doing a collaboration with food sciences right now. This is like an ongoing project where we've done, what you're seeing here is a 3D capture of a local cafe. And we've taken this 3D capture and combined it with some video and some other 3D modeling. And what actually happens, I'm going to point for a second, is you sit down at this table. And you sit down at this table in virtual reality, and somebody serves you a real coffee, and you can see the real coffee, and you can drink this coffee, and they're doing a study so that now they might serve you the same coffee, but in a different environment, but not tell you. How much does your opinion or sense of the taste of that coffee, how much of that is affected by your surroundings? Again, a research question, but something that we can actually have a conversation about, because just as they might have a very scientific end goal, we're also really interested in how the artistic sensibility comes across. What does it mean when we're involving, what does it mean when we're building tools for artists as we're building tools for a scientific study? Because this also is a conversation about what does it mean to combine multiple kinds of capture technologies, multiple kinds of VR technologies into one system. I could get really technical about why this is an interesting and novel combination, but it's out of scope for this talk. And finally, a project that we worked on for many years was a collaboration with the medical center to think about what it looks like to train people for really important situations using VR. In this case, what does it look like to train first responders to go down into a subway station, find a mass casualty event, and figure out who to treat? I mean, this is a really important question. And you can imagine that if you want to train the 10,000 ambulance drivers in New York City to do this work, that we have to set up a stage, we have to pay actors, and we've got to do this over and over and over again with props and makeup. Or we can set up a virtual reality situation where there's lots of different kinds of patients, but it still involves the entire community. We have actors doing motion capture for all of the different potential patients. We have voice actors from theater who are intoning the sort of the pain and the healing that's happening in the process. We have people who are doing 3D modeling. We have people who are doing programming so that each time you play the experience, different patients have different problems, and the situation's different every time you encounter it. That's what training looks like, as opposed to just watching a film and making decisions on it, right? So this sort of like complex set of engagements across technologies really opens a lot of doors. This is going on to becoming a professional training tool. That's not work that we're doing. We prototyped the work. We showed that this proof of concept works and is possible, and we pass that on and let people who are professional software developers do that work beyond that. We're really interested in the experimentation, testing the edges of what's possible. That's the kind of questions that ACCAD is taking on. And finally, this cascades down to our classes. We have classes which are really engaging with a lot of different mediums and materials, playing at the bleeding edge of emerging technologies. In this case, a real-time AI system is essentially re-costuming dancers on a dance stage in real time. So thinking about costume or the body as transformable in real time using new technologies. Or, again, doing some really motion capture work with theater students. Some of this work actually was being done 17 years ago in 2009 with this project called Synchronous Objects. This is a collaboration between choreographer William Forsythe and his dance company. And he had this really sort of amazing dance that takes place around this series of tables. It's a really sort of architectural space and an architectural sensibility, and it questions how we move through a sort of gridded space. The dance itself is very interesting in the way that the dancers are reacting to each other. And so an effort was undertaken to take videos of this work and actually track down how the dancers were getting signals from each other, were moving, how those movements were related to each other, and then to take all of this data and to actually extract it and use it across lots of different disciplines, including design, statistics, geography, architecture. All of these different areas were engaged. But this is an earlier moment in time when you had to do a lot of this work by hand or using earlier technologies, including something called computer vision. Computer vision was slow. It was hard to use. You needed certain kinds of computing, and it's very sort of focused and specialized. And we've since had some real revolutions in what we're able to do. For instance, you bear with me for just a second. And oh goodness, here we go. For instance, this technology can now make this possible in real time. This is a real-time tracking system. Depends on your lighting, but in general, it can pick up everything that I do near real time. I think this is about 40 frames a second. This is a tool called MediaPipe that actually is made by Google, and it's been trained on millions of human motions and movements, so that just using a basic computer and a really lightweight machine learning model, aka AI. Using a really simple AI model, I can quickly just develop the capacity to do this kind of tracking of people. And again, it's an interesting question, like, why do we want this? Well, I could actually determine whether or not I'm looking at you or you by using the sort of ability to track my eyes. I could be tracking and have the ability to actually determine the sign language somebody's using by tracking my hand gestures. So there's a lot of opportunities that continue to open up as these technologies move forward. And again, this is a technology that's a couple years old at this point, and it's like freely and openly available. The actual bleeding edge space of this technology is actually much quicker and much more robust. So I'm going to switch back here. I do have to shut it off, so my there you go. My computer will start to overheat a little bit here. And cursor. All right. So where does all this take us? Well, we continue to do this development, but I'm especially interested in the notion of gesture. You're seeing me gesticulate up here on stage. I'm trying to convey various things by the ways that I'm flashing my hands, palm up to you. I'm offering you information, right? And you're all reading this culturally. You understand what that might mean in this particular room from this body. But somebody else making a gesture might mean something very different. And so we quickly find that when we want to do gesture analysis, or we want to understand what another human is indicating, it's actually much more difficult than simply building the universal models. And already VR developers are making things like this, where we can sort of train people to do very specific gestures, but it's all very on-off, like, are the fingers pinched together or not, right? But I would proffer the question that if I give you a series of gestures right now, I give you this, or I give you this, I give you this, those mean three different things. But the data set for those three sets of gestures are actually really subtle in their difference. And they actually mean different things in different places, right? In some places, this is actually how you tell somebody to come here, as opposed to this. And the velocity directions of this versus this, again, are a subtle difference, something that you wouldn't want to write code to solve. But we might want to figure out what that actually looks like for AI. And companies are racing to do this work. This is an acquisition that Apple just made of a company called QAI. This is a patent drawing for their new technology, which detects micro movements in your face, stuff that you're not able to control. Because they know, by the ways that we watch each other, we can actually read each other's emotional states by the ways that various muscles clench, unclench, shift, and move on a face. But that technology can't read those yet being the operative word. And I think what's so interesting to me is that a lot of what AI is doing is a new AI model will allow new methods of reading the human body. That new model allows for gathering of new data. That new data makes a new model. The new model makes a new set of way to look at the human body. That new way of looking at the human body makes data, makes a new model. And you can see this cycle. And you can see these processes and where this might be going. And so the question that I have to keep in mind, both as leader of ACCAD, but also an artist operating in this world, and also deeply involved with the AI initiative here at the university, is this essential question that the arts and humanities themselves are actually directly engaged with and connected to the humans. You make art for other humans. You study other humans for art history. The humanities are a study of humans past, present, and future, more broad, in a very broad sense. But there's a direct connection between these groups. And so the really big question is, like, where do we want AI to be in this circle or in this set of connections? One answer to this is this diagram was made by AI. It saved me a whole bunch of time. I did not have to make this diagram. I just explained to it what I wanted and it made it. So I don't know, maybe that's what I want from my AI. But at the end of the day, this is what I'm thinking about on a daily basis. And I hope that you all think about this as well. As we see this kind of AI slop being thrown around as the future of art and the future of artwork, I would turn the question to say, what do the arts actually want from AI? What do we want? What are the things that we would actually like it to have help with? And it may be in understanding how people are expressing themselves. It may be in making quick diagrams. It may be in record keeping, because I'm too busy making art to keep track of who needs an invoice when I make my work. there may be some openings, but also there are a lot of things I don't want AI involved in. And so we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so maybe we can bring up the house lights, and Chris can take some questions. Let's see. Somebody have a question? Red shirt guy, go ahead.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts about your recent stuff between Anthropic and no.
All right, so we have a question about whether I have any thoughts about Anthropic and OpenAI. I don't have a lot of thoughts about it, other than to say that for those of you who don't know, right now the Pentagon, the US Pentagon, is demanding that AI companies give them full control to use their AIs for killing people. Thank you. And so because the AI companies, as a default, were actually trying to write rules that said, no, we don't really want you to use our tools to kill people. And we're actually, I think it's even better way to phrase it is, our tools are not at a state where the decision whether or not to kill another human being should be turned over to a machine. I think that's the best way to put it. So if the AI company isn't comfortable with that, I really hope somebody in the military also is not comfortable with that. But it does point to some really existential questions that continue to come up about how we're using AI and where.
For the AV crew, let's raise the house lights a little further. Sir, go ahead.
If you had given the assignment to a student to make the chart that you showed AI made, what would your assessment of that be? What would your compliments have been? What would your conclusion have been? And what grade would you have given that?
That's a great question. I think it's about a B- level chart. And I will admit that's after going through about 4 iterations. Using AI means a lot of back and forth. I think this is a big conversation that we have in the space is you have to learn to talk to AI in a very particular way. People talk about, it's replacing, it's making everything easier, but we're still having to learn to use a really weird particular language to talk to that weird thing. So yeah, that's B-.
Go front row, or near front row.
So as AI continues to move forward with its own generation of alleged art, how it's constantly drawing more and more information off of pre-existing artworks created by humans, has there been major backlash as to the taking of art to be used unwillingly to create more advanced engines?
Yeah, sorry. So the question is about how artists are really reacting to the fact that these AI models are built on human art, right? That's how it works, is you feed it billions of pictures. All the pictures we've been putting up on Instagram and our websites and Facebook, we've been feeding the machine. We didn't know where it was going to go at the time, but we were signing the terms and conditions that said, yeah, you can use this later for whatever you want. They've decided to use it all. And they fed it all into image making machines. And a lot of artists are really upset about it. And I think it's a huge conversation that we're having in the arts. It's the reason I broached it here at the end of the talk. I actually taught a class on creative AI in the fall semester. So I have done a little bit of this here at the university. I actually have a student who, sorry, I thought I had a student here, but maybe not. But suffice to say, it's a really It's a really interesting question that I have many personal thoughts on, and other artists have significant disagreement with me. That's a conversation that I would have one-on-one maybe. Because just to say this out loud, I think it's a really complex and nuanced conversation. Like, what does it mean to have your work in these machines? And I think just as much as that, or almost as much as that, is what does it mean for somebody to sit down and type in an artist's name when they're trying to make an art? And I really don't think, I'll say this out loud, I don't think that if you just type a bunch of text into a system and get a picture, I don't think that that's art. I think art actually involves a more complex process. I will note that the patent office actually agrees with me. You actually have to manipulate an AI product in order to make it yours. So I think there are complex things there. And if you're typing in, make an art like Chris Coleman, I think you're actually the one responsible for trying to copy my work, not the system. But yeah.
Very back row, and also to the AV team, please raise the house lights a little higher. Go ahead, back row.
So what are your thoughts of using AI to
What are my thoughts about using AI to help the elderly, both with fall detection as well as loneliness? Oh, wow, those are two very different questions, aren't they? I think, again, I'm not that person in that situation, and I don't want to put out judgment for how these things are happening. I'm very happy that one of my family members is now committed to wearing one of these things, and that when she fell recently, it was able to get help for her. I think that's actually a pretty important set of technologies that are relatively low impact and readily available. I think having an AI be your companion is a much more complicated question, and a lot of that is because these systems aren't built to do that work in an ethical or moral way, and yet they're being asked to do that work because of the form they've been taken. Like, they don't need to be chatbots, let's just be clear. They don't need to be interactive chatbots, and yet that's how they're being pushed out to us, and there are very real repercussions with that decision.
So go ahead, right there. Yep.
So most of this AI was trained on like the internet, human inputted data, or they do it or not. It's still 0.2 or so. And then since that, also there is a ton of stuff on the internet. That some theories that eventually the internet will basically go towards like basically 100% AI generated content, just gets able to generate so much faster. People are so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like what feedback loops that might create, where that might be going, whether for AI, like future generations of AI or for yeah.
All right, I'll try and. So the question is, a lot of the internet and other data sources were all sort of scraped into various piles. They built all the AI systems around 2022. Once the AI systems started producing their own stuff, whether that is chatbots or pictures, we've actually already broached the point where there are more AI images on the internet than there are human-made images. Like, we've already passed that point. And so the question, at its essence, is now that they can no longer scrape the internet for human sources, and instead they're going to get their own stuff just as much as they're going to get human work, what does that mean for the future of AI? And it means, I cannot answer that question, but I will say that it is a huge thing that the AI companies are trying to deal with. I think it's some of the reason that people suspect that there are AI bubbles, and it's overhyped, and that they've already reached the best it will get because we've already used the human data. But they are, in fact, making non-human data to continue to feed the systems in hopes that they'll continue to make breakthroughs. I guess we're going to find out. But I think it's interesting to say that there are artists who actually like the image tools from 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, and they still have artistic practices using those much more rudimentary tools because they feel there's something more special there before AI tried to hone in on being more human. So I think there's a lot of space to navigate there, and don't throw away your old models. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Here, more stable, you have that creative drive. Now that we have these tools, how do you prepare students? Like, you could say we could get lazier with it, but how do you facilitate that creative process in them to be original and to find their different designs instead of kind of like getting lazy in that stage, let's say, or how do you keep facilitating them, I guess, being within or expressing themselves or finding reasons to instead of just saying, turning to the chatbots of everything was that, like, how do you interact, like, facilitate interacting with it without being consumed with it or without, like, stretching themselves when it's so easy for them to not have to maybe do that in a way. So, like, as an educator, how do you make people the master of the tool but not be mastered by the tool?
All right, so we had a very informed question about how do we think about encouraging students to be creative in a moment when tools claim that they can be creative for you or with you? How do we help students navigate collaboration? I'm using that term vaguely. How do we help students do that in smart ways so that they still have agency? Is that fair? All right. And I would say the good news is that these tools are not creative at all, really. I think anybody who has spent a little bit of time with the tools will quickly find out that everything it suggests is the most cliched, average solution to a problem because it's been fed all the problems, and then its most probable solution to anything is the most average answer. And so actually, I'm excited that it actually produces even more energy towards artists finding their creative voice, for finding creative space, to chart pathways that aren't the most cliched thing that's already in the system. So I'm really excited by the fact that there's so much more space for artists now. And again, this means that we have to continue to separate what the AI hype train says is new art, and instead really define art as something that emerges from humans for other humans with deep meaning, with cultural value, and that's the way forward.
That was super cool. We'll take 2 questions more. Go ahead over there. Yeah.
Yeah, could you touch on the role of sustainability in all of this? Because I thought it was really you straight at the beginning. We showed up and shared airspace, and how your exhibit kind of forced people to see how we all share that as try to help people feel more responsible for it, right?
Yeah.
I can't help but think about the irony of hearing about COSAD, ACCAD, and their desire to, solve community problems while also directly participating in a community problem, which is the fact that every time you use AI, you're participating in, the ecological destruction of the places that it is, of the fact that, any place that has had a data center, now we all pay for their electric bills.
Right.
Waterways, integrates. How is that?
This is great. The question was about, some of my earlier work was talking quite a bit about sustainability, especially, around pollution and energy use. That work as an artist, we were thinking quite carefully about that. And of course, I think the work of ACCAD is one kind of interesting discussion about how they've been using technologies. Technologies that are now wrapped up in the AI conversation, but actually weren't called AI until just a couple years ago. And then I think there's the bigger conversation of, like, as the interim director of the Arts and Humanities AI Institute, that I'm having to reconcile what it means to be an artist and a humanitarian and a humanist in a moment when AI is having really devastating ecological effects. Fair? Yeah, all right. These are the huge questions that we're facing. I think there's the whataboutism answers, right? It's like, if you watch an hour of Netflix, you're using the same amount of data center as making 12,000 images in AI. So, like, we actually all need to think deeply about all the stuff that we're doing online, all the stuff that we're doing with data centers. So I would broaden out part of that question to this sort of bigger concern. But that doesn't mean, but it should be noted that, like, there's a very specific change that has happened, right, recently with building new data centers, sucking up more power, or intending to suck up more power right now, because they think that capacity needs to be put online. It's capacity that we're not using right now. So, I think we all have different answers to this. I think the open source community work around COSA, we're actually deeply invested in writing software ourselves and not using AI. I think the work of ACCAD and actually my AI class, we did all of our AI computing on the computer in front of us. So we weren't interested in the cloud or the data centers or any of that things. We were interested in how do you have a direct relationship to the AI that you're using. And I think there are ways that can be one answer for you personally as an artist and a creative person who's sustainably concerned. And then I think it emerges into bigger answers, which is we need to really quickly move to making smaller models that do really what we need, that can run on a Raspberry Pi with a solar panel. Like, that's the exciting future of AI. I'm not really interested in a giant chatbot that's going to solve all of our problems. And so again, I think separating out what is AI, who's defining AI, and the scales that it can exist on, because that wrapper has grabbed way too much. So I hope that helps a little bit.
All right, Tiger Stripes, last question.
Firewalls are being put up for AI art, like we're seeing on X using children. What kind of legal things are you foreseeing are going to be put into place to prevent misuse of the AI art?
Education. Education. Like, I got to be frank. A student in a drawing class could draw material that's not appropriate just as much, and the AI system can do that. And they don't do it because we educate them about why you don't do that.
Yet it's already on the media, social media, and
Yeah, but people are choosing to do that.
yeah.
I mean, let's be frank. Those are people. Those are people making those choices, and so it's a really weird moment when it only takes a sentence to make something that appalling. But we are now in that moment, and so the question is, like, how do we reconnect to the moral contracts that we have with each other, and work on why you shouldn't be typing those sentences into the machine. So it's not to excuse these companies, but I'm deep enough into the AI scene that I see there's entire populations whose entire focus is, fake porn, nudity stuff, and it's really abhorrent, and we need to get those people help, and really address why they feel the need to do that all day.
Section 8 law bill.
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, as an educator, I see it's my job to have those tough conversations and really address that at the source.
Okay, that was an unusually heavy question to end with. But I think today's questions were really unusually thoughtful, and I want to thank everybody for raising them, and for Chris for taking the time to answer them all. So let's go upstairs and have a cookie and think lighter.